Hello, and welcome to the What is Happening with DACA webinar, hosted by Americans for Immigrant Justice, Fordham Law School's Farrick Center for Social Justice, the National Immigration Law Center, and the University of California Immigrant Legal Services Center. My name is Rachel Reyes, and I will be your moderator today. I am a managing attorney at the University of California Immigrant Legal Services Center. My pronouns are on the screen, and I'm joining you from unceded Patwin land in what is called California. The UC Center provides free immigration legal services across California to University of California students and their immediate family members, mostly serving undocumented students and individuals with DACA. Student activism sparked our center's creation, which was one of the first of its kind. As an immigration attorney within one of the largest university systems in the United States, I definitely know the importance of these issues for our students who face limitations that upon graduating and during college itself lead to living with the insecurity and fear of removal from the United States. In hopes of advocacy that will lead the undocumented community to a greater sense of security, I'm honored to share this space today with other advocates. During this webinar, we'll talk about the importance of DACA as a protection for members of our community, about DACA's eligibility requirements, about the state of DACA litigation and its implications, and about current advocacy efforts to expand DACA eligibility and how you can get involved in those efforts. Our wonderful panelists today are Jess Hanson, who is a staff attorney at the National Immigration Law Center, Ted Hutchinson, who is the Florida State Director at Forward.us, Jesus Reyes, who is an immigration attorney at Jesus Reyes Law, and Cassandra Suprin, who is the director of the Family Defense Program at Americans for Immigrant Justice. Before we begin, I'd like to provide you with some logistical information. Participants can submit written questions at any time during the presentation. During the presentation, we will respond in writing to as many of those questions as we can, and we will answer any additional questions we have time for live at the end. CLE information will be provided at the conclusion of the presentation. Please note that the presentation is being recorded. We will circulate the recording to registrants after the presentation. Now to begin, I'd like to provide some statistics about who has been able to benefit from DACA and who has not. According to USCIS, approximately 600,000 individuals have DACA. The majority of DACA recipients are from Mexico, more than 400,000 individuals, and thousands come from all over the world, with larger numbers of those recipients being from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, South Korea, Peru, Brazil, Ecuador, Colombia, Argentina, the Philippines, India, Jamaica, Venezuela, and the Dominican Republic. According to statistics from the Department of Homeland Security published in 2021, there were approximately 11,390,000 undocumented individuals in the US in 2018. The majority of those individuals were between the ages of 35 and 44. The vast majority of undocumented immigrants at that time lived in California, followed by Texas, Florida, New York, and New Jersey. As of 2017, the Pew Research Center found that approximately 66% of undocumented immigrants lived in the US for more than 10 years. As of 2017, immigrants from Mexico no longer constitute the majority of individuals living in the US without authorization. Many parents of DACA recipients, and those who may not fit into what we call the dreamer narrative, as well as those who were too young to receive DACA before the litigation began, have been left out of DACA. This number is in the hundreds of thousands of individuals. So with that context, I'll pass the mic to Jesus Reyes, who will talk about the importance of DACA based on their lived experience. Jesus, take it away.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you everyone for joining us on this webinar. It's truly an honor to be here and to be speaking about this very important subject, which is DACA. Now, why is DACA so important? I know Rachel just recently talked about how there's so many DACA recipients and how there is a need to pass some sort of comprehensive immigration reform. But I want to take your attention into some numbers. For instance, DACA recipients just this past year, they were able to contribute to our economy by billions of dollars that was, they pay in taxes. But not only that, DACA recipients are people that are in the front lines when it comes to fighting COVID by providing assistance to people that have medical needs. In the education system, these are people that are truly engaged and are truly part of our community. These are people that are part of our society. And in every area that you can think of, they are making a difference. But I want to take this a little deeper. These people are family members. These people are brothers. These people are neighbors. These people are perhaps your teachers. These people are perhaps your neighbors. And sometimes when we speak about DACA or some sort of immigration reform, sometimes we lose sense of that we're talking about people that have bonds, people that have family ties in the United States, people that contribute through nonprofit work, through their actual work or organizations, and that are making a truthful impact in our communities. Now, I want to talk about a special case that will sort of grasp the idea of DACA and will make you sort of think of it not just as another sort of legislation or proposal, but will make you understand how deep this situation is, the DACA situation. We're going to talk about Carlos, a young man from Guatemala. Carlos is someone that came to the US in the year 2000. He had many dreams, he had goals and ambitions to do something extraordinary in this land of opportunity. Now, this young man went on to college. He went through middle school, high school, and he actually ended up studying criminal justice in his local college. However, one night, this young man, as he was getting ready to go to school, he heard a knock. Someone was knocking his apartment door. When he came to find out who it was ICE officials. This young man was terrified. His father was terrified. Everybody in that apartment was terrified because after being here for so many years, this young man literally saw his dreams vanish at one point. This young man was taken to a detention facility, and this young man was about to be deported to his home country. He was told, hey, you have no legal status. You're supposed to go back to your country. This young man was detained, was handcuffed, basically treated as a criminal. And his only perhaps issue was that he did not have lawful status. Just as he was about to be deported, about 2-3 days before his deportation took place, an organization came to assist this young man to eventually be released from the detention center. This took a lot of work from his fellow students, members of Congress, and this organization. This young man went up to become an attorney and have his own law firm and help thousands upon thousands of immigrants achieve the American dream. The interesting news about this young man is that his real name is not Pablo. It's actually Jesus Reyes. Is the man that is speaking to you right now. And he's not from Honduras or Guatemala. He's from Venezuela. I am that young man. I am that person who once upon a time, I saw my dreams vanished. And the one thing that I truly wanted to do was to make a difference. I just needed a chance. I wasn't asking for a handout. I wasn't asking for things to be given to me easily or free, as so many of those who advocate against DACA will say. I was just asking for an opportunity. And it wasn't just me. It was my brothers. It was my siblings. It was my friends from school. And we just wanted a chance. Perhaps we came when we were little, and perhaps we didn't know exactly what we were getting ourselves into. But I do thank my family for giving me the opportunity to be in this country. And I know sometimes parents of DACA recipients, sometimes they don't get a good rep. People say, well, but you took those kids and you placed them in an unlawful situation. But perhaps people should be mindful about what are the reasons why will make those parents leave everything behind, everything they've achieved for a better future. Many people just run from persecution. Some others look for a better future in the United States. And that was my parents' goal, to look for a better future and to avoid future persecution in our home country of Venezuela. Today, I have the honor and the privilege to be a licensed attorney, and of course, also an American citizen. And by the way, that organization that helped me at that point was Americans for Immigrant Justice, which is one of the organizations that is hosting this program. I think it's imperative for people to understand that DACA is not just this foreign concept that is just going to help a small group of migrants. These are real people with family members, with aspirations, with goals and dreams. And statistically speaking, these are people that are actually contributing a lot in our economy through their work, through their expertise, and our articles and research has been done on this, and over again, it shows the positive impact that DACA recipients have in the United States. It is my hope that through this program, through this webinar, people will understand DACA, will understand the requirements to be eligible for DACA, but more importantly, that people will understand how important this is for not just a group of people, but for the entire country. Because when this group of people succeed, then the entire country in one way or another will benefit. So I hope that through my story, I was able to sort of humanize this topic. I still remember every so often when I see my clients or when I have to go help people in detention facilities throughout the country, especially the one that I was detained at, which is Broward Transitional Center. It always reminds me of where I came from, and honestly how blessed I am to have had the opportunity to be represented by a group of people that believed in me, and also to be supported by so many members of my community. Again, a lot of what the young men and women that are in this program are asking for is a chance to be able to contribute, a chance to be able to achieve their goals, and a chance to fulfill the American dream, not just for them, but for their family members. So it is truly an honor to be here. I hope that this story will sort of inspire you and make you understand a little bit more about DACA. And just a quick announcement, I will soon be publishing a book, an autobiography about my story, which if anybody's interested, we'll soon have that information. But I would like for people to understand the plight, especially of those young immigrants that are coming to the US and want to achieve a better future. And now, if you guys have any questions, anything in particular that perhaps in the chat, or if anybody has any specific questions about my story, or perhaps about the DACA program, feel free to ask. We're here to help you. We're here to help you understand this program better. But I truly say to you that it changed my life at a moment where I had no legal recourse for me to stay in the United States. Right at that moment was when DACA actually took place. Before, used to be Deferred Action. So I was one, and I must say this, I was one of the first few recipients that had Deferred Action in the United States. Eventually, under President Obama, this turned into a nationwide relief for young immigrants known as DACA. And so it is a blessing, and that is, you know, I'm a product of that, and that is the reason I'm standing here before you today. Do you guys have any questions? Do you guys have anything in particular you would like to know about, again, DACA or my personal story? All right, so with that said, I want to thank you guys again. You know, I'll always be available. I believe our contact information, it's available to you guys, and if not, it will soon be available to all of you. But I want to thank you again for, you know, tuning in, for taking some of your time to understand this concept. It is truly important to be acquainted with what's going on in our country, and this is one of the topics, especially the immigration topic in general. But this specific topic is one of those that is truly important for our communities, for our country. So I do thank you for taking your time to learn more about this topic. And again, I'll be more than happy to answer any questions in the future. Thank you so much.
Jesus, before you log off, there is an interesting question for you, but I'll kind of answer it. We'll answer it together. How do we do this? For instance, before I ask that particular question, just for you guys to
Cassandra, it looks like you're frozen. I'm not sure if you can hear us.
Yeah, I think it froze. And I was really expecting the question. Or perhaps, Cassandra, if you could hear me, maybe you could send it through the chat and I'll be able to answer it. Yeah, so if anybody has a specific question, I'll be more than glad to answer it. Okay, I'm getting a few questions here. How did Jesus become a citizen? Oh, interesting question. Well, long story short, so I had deferred action, and eventually I was a DACA recipient for many years. Eventually, I was able to reopen my immigration court case. By that time, I was already an adult. I was going to college. I was finishing school. You know what happens in college. You meet people, you fall in love. And eventually I ended up meeting the love of my life. And ultimately, I was able to apply for adjustment of status.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Jesus. So basically, let's talk about the nuts and bolts of DACA. We could go over the eligibility of DACA. Basically, DACA was instituted in 2012. But the requirements were you had to be physically present on or before June 15, 2012, at the time you were applying for DACA, and you had to be under 31 at the time. You had to be you had to be continuously residing in the US as of June 15, 2007, and you had to be under the age of 16 at the time you entered the United States. You either had to be enrolled in school, have graduated, or honorably discharged. And you should not have been convicted of any felony, significant misdemeanor offenses, multiple misdemeanor offenses, or otherwise pose a threat to national security or public safety. So that's basically the requirements for DACA. Although a lot of things have changed, there's a new DACA rule that became effective as of October 31st, 2022, but the requirements remain the same. What is happening right now, I know there's a section that's going to talk about pending litigation, but the biggest question that a lot of people have is with this new rule that came out that became effective as of October 31st, 2022, what has changed? Basically, nothing has changed pending litigation. Currently, USCIS is only accepting DACA renewals. That means people who are currently DACA recipients who are renewing, which they should be renewing between 120 to 150 days prior to the expiration date. And people who have let their DACA status lapse as long as they're renewing less than a year. Anybody who's applying for DACA at this particular point in time, new DACA recipients, or people who had let their DACA expire more than a year, they are considered as new DACA recipients. And right now they're not adjudicating new DACA cases. When a new DACA applicant has applied for DACA, what's happening right now, USCIS is putting on hold pending the litigation. So although they're trying to codify the DACA memo into a DACA rule and it's effective, but nothing is actually happening. So right now, only current DACA recipients can renew, and new DACA applicants are, if you have filed your DACA application, it's still pending the litigation. At this point, I know the litigation is really tied to what I'm talking about. So that's a basic nuts and bolts about DACA. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassandra. We'll now pass the mic to Jess.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks, Cassandra, for that really helpful foundation. I'm going to give an overview of the DACA litigation, what is happening right now, and sort of the foundation to make sure we're all starting with the same understanding in order to understand what's happening right now. So my name is Jess Hanson. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a staff attorney at NILC, the National Immigration Law Center, and I'm one of the litigators in the Batalla Vidal lawsuit related to DACA in the Eastern District of New York. Next slide, please. Thank you, Clementine, for managing our technology here. So before we start with what is going on right now, I want to give you a quick refresher on sort of the biggest court developments around DACA over the last 5 years. And so in the next 2 slides, there's a timeline here, and you'll see that it's sort of color-coded. Blue refers to the New York litigation, the one that I'm involved in, Batalla Vidal. Orange refers to the Texas litigation in the Southern District of Texas, and gray will refer to important events that are not strictly in the court cases to help you follow along here. So as you know, DACA has been under attack for 5 years now, for more than 5 years. First, in September of 2017, the Trump administration published the Duke Memorandum, which attempted to rescind DACA. The same day, DACA recipients leading the charge in the Eastern District of New York filed a lawsuit challenging the Duke Memorandum in federal court in Batalla Vidal. They're represented by us here at NILC, as well as our co-counsel, Make the Road New York, and the Yale Law School Legal Services Organization. Several other lawsuits were also filed across the country mostly led by DACA recipients and directly impacted individuals to challenge this Duke Memorandum. Meanwhile, in May of 2018, Texas led several states to file a new lawsuit in federal court in Texas, challenging the legality of the original 2012 DACA program. This case was assigned, as you all likely know, to Judge Hanson in the Southern District of Texas. And Judge Hanson is the same judge who had previously struck down DAPA, the Deferred Action for Parents of Americans and Lawful Permanent Residents, a few years earlier. In that lawsuit, later, the state of New Jersey, as well as 22 individual DACA recipients represented by MALDEF, intervened as defendants in that lawsuit to defend DACA as well. So there's several parties in that case: the US government, Texas, and the various states, the state of New Jersey, and MALDEF on behalf of 22 DACA recipients. Then the next month, in June of 2018, going back to the New York and similar cases that were challenging the Duke memo, the Supreme Court actually agreed with several lower courts that the way in which the Trump administration had tried to end DACA was unlawful. It's important to note that this decision had nothing to do with the merits of DACA. It only had to do with the way Trump had ended it, or tried to. In response to this decision, 1 month later, the Trump administration issued another memo trying to severely curtail DACA. This was the Wolf memo. The plaintiffs in Batalla Vidal, again, challenged this memo. And by December 2020, we were successful. And our court, the Eastern District of New York, vacated the Wolf memo, which reinstated the 2012 DACA program for the first time in 3 years. And ordered that USCIS must accept DACA applications for consideration, both initials and renewals. And thereafter, thousands upon thousands of people submitted their first-time DACA applications. Many of those were approved. Around 8,000, we think, were approved during that time period. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, though, the reopening of DACA to first-time applicants was short-lived, because only 7 months after the New York court's order reopening DACA, the Texas court issued its order that held DACA to be unlawful. Unfortunately, at that time, USCIS stopped granting first-time DACA applications and even clawed back some approvals that it had accidentally granted after the date of Judge Hanson's order in Texas. USCIS also stopped granting renewal requests for people whose previous grant of DACA had expired more than 1 year ago. And that's because the Texas court ordered USCIS to stop granting new DACA requests. And the government interpreted those renewals that had been filed after a year of a lapse as first-time applications, the granting of which was barred by the Texas order. Importantly, and again, I think most of us already are familiar with this, but just to say it, the Texas court stayed its own order with respect to renewals, which means it did not allow the order striking down DACA to go into effect for renewals for people who had DACA and could renew. And that is how DACA has, folks with DACA have been able to renew all this time, is because of that stay. The US government appealed this order to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and DACA's legality was then briefed in paper briefs as well as oral arguments before the Fifth Circuit. The parties in that case also argued about standing, which is the legal ability to sue. And in order to do that, Texas had to show it was injured by DACA. Meanwhile, over 90,000 people who had applied for first-time applications for DACA in between December 2020, when the New York court ruled, and July 2021, when the Texas court ruled, were still stuck in limbo. Their applications were just sitting there, not being processed, not being approved. And to this day, that's still the case. In the midst of all of this, in August of 2022, DHS actually published the final rule on DACA, which my colleague Ted is going to talk about with you shortly. And then later on October 5th, the Fifth Circuit issued its decision on the legality of the 2012 DACA policy. It held first that Texas did have standing, and its reasoning for that was that Texas was injured by having to provide federal emergency Medicaid coverage and spend costs there with respect to DACA recipients, as well as the fact that federal government mandated that all students, regardless of citizenship status, had to be provided with public school access. And so very unfortunate ruling there. We were all expecting it, but it still didn't lessen the blow. It was another huge blow to DACA. So the Fifth Circuit agreed with Judge Hanson that the 2012 policy was unlawful and violated the Immigration and Nationality Act. Notably, the Fifth Circuit did not make any decisions with respect to the rule at all. It only focused on the 2012 memo that initiated DACA. Instead of saying anything about the rule, the Fifth Circuit sent the case back down to Judge Hanson in the Southern District of Texas to consider the legality of the DACA rule in the first instance. Now, while the Fifth Circuit has not formally issued a decision on the DACA rule, the writing is on the wall a little bit there because unfortunately the US government in that case conceded that the final rule is materially indistinguishable from the 2012 policy, and the Fifth Circuit held the 2012 policy was unlawful. And so connecting the dots there, we're looking at a negative ruling in the future there. Finally, the Southern District of Texas has started taking steps in accordance with what the Fifth Circuit asked it to do, which is to review the rule. It held a status conference on October 14th, and then on the same day issued an order saying that its previous July 2021 order applies to the DACA rule, and so it will not be implemented in full by the government. Finally, here on this slide, just a couple weeks ago, the US government submitted what is called the administrative record, which is an important step for the Southern District of Texas to be able to consider the rule. Next slide, please. So given all of these developments, the question we have heard very often is, what is the timeline? What's happening next and when? And the short answer is it depends, and we cannot say for certain. So with that very important caveat, I have on the screen here a sort of sample or estimate timeline of what we could see happen. But again, this is not certain. This is any of these aspects could change. So take this as a roadmap, but not anything that is set in stone. So until November 28th, the Fifth Circuit still has the case formally, legally. It doesn't pass down to the district court until the Fifth Circuit issues what's called a mandate. And as of now, the date that is set by the rules is November 28th. And so until that date, the parties in the case have some options as to what they want to do next. But if we get to that date and nothing has happened, then the case will be formally sent back down to Judge Hanson. Thereafter, based on what was said during the conference before Judge Hanson, we should expect to see the parties propose an agreeable briefing schedule to Judge Hanson sometime late this month or early next month. And then between December and probably February or so, the parties will be submitting their paper briefs to Judge Hanson. Sometime in the spring, Judge Hanson will hear oral arguments on the briefs, which again will focus on if the rule is legal. And then likely in the summer or fall of next year, Judge Hanson will rule again on the legality of the rule. And then finally, we will expect to see another appeal up through the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Next slide, please. Very last here, before I pass it over to Ted, in practical terms, what does all this mean? What is the current status quo? And Cassandra touched on this as well, but I think bears repeating. Renewals can continue for now. Advanced parole is still available for DACA recipients for the same exact reasons. Nothing has changed there. While the DACA rule did go into limited effect on October 31st, first-time applicants are still not being processed. They can submit their applications and the money, and USCIS is taking the money, but knowing that USCIS will not process those applications because of the court orders. USCIS is still treating renewals that lapsed as first-time applicants and not granting those, unfortunately. So again, folks can submit, but they're not going to be processed or granted. Renewals can and should still be filed as normal. And then finally, a really important point that the latest decisions holding DACA unlawful really signal that DACA is hanging by a thread and Congress needs to act now. And I will stop there and pass it over to my colleague, Ted.
Thank you, Jess. I appreciate that. You guys laying a great foundation for what DACA is, who DACA recipients are, and who else is eligible for DACA. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Biden rule that Jess mentioned previously, and talk a little bit about what needs to happen next in order to save this group of folks. So the Biden rule, like Jess alluded to, is essentially pretty much the same thing as the Obama rule, the Obama memo that they passed in 2012. It provides work authorization, protects people from deportation. And the one thing that we're really grateful to the administration for is that they actually scrapped the plan to decouple and separate work authorization from deportation protections. That is like essential, right? Because if you're an employee or a DACA recipient applying for a job, right, and they want to hire you, but they don't know if you'll be here tomorrow, like that would prevent them from, bringing on the work. And so that was essential to what they did in the Biden rule. Like I said, the work authorization under DACA is vital to its success. You heard Jesus allude to it earlier, how he was able, to go to law school, start his firm, right? So that work authorization has enabled about 3/4 of DACA recipients to participate more fully in the labor force, provide for their families, enrich their communities. And I believe Jesus alluded to this number earlier, but the contributions from DACA recipients in the U.S. economy each year is $11.7 billion. And so, providing work authorization as part of the DACA was the right move. But what the rule doesn't do, the rule doesn't provide permanent protections, right? It doesn't provide the permanent protections that DACA recipients and their families deserve and have been waiting for like, 10, 20 years almost. And the other thing that it doesn't do, I think you heard the other panelists allude to it, it doesn't change the eligibility requirements. It doesn't make anyone newly eligible for the policy. So I think there are about 400,000 people out there, I believe, that may be eligible for DACA. If they were allowed to. And so, so the folks who currently have DACA are in a good position, but a lot of folks who don't have it are sort of stuck in this limbo. So really, what this is about is trying to get Congress to act right now. I'm actually in DC right now. We have an advocacy day tomorrow. We've flown in over 100 DACA recipients from around the country, from Florida, California, Texas, New Mexico, all over. And we're going to hit the hill tomorrow for lobby day. And we're going to ask for them to pass protections in the lame duck session, right? And the reason that this time period right now is so essential is that, given sort of like, the tea leaves and sort of, understanding where, each party stands on immigration, assuming that the GOP does take control of the House, and there's eventually a Speaker McCarthy, he has no intention of doing anything related to immigration unless it's, about the border, right? And so this time period right now, between now and the time they go home between Christmas, we've got to get something passed. And so fortunately, there was some good news this morning. We heard from the Hill, we heard from leaders in both the House and the Senate that they have a legislative fix that they're working on and that they're going to try to get passed. And so what we're going to do tomorrow, and what we're going to be doing from now until Christmas break, is trying to get that piece of legislation passed. And I think the way to do it is to attach it to end of year, must pass end of year spending bills that keep the government open, keep the government running. And so I know that people like Senator Padilla is talking to Senator John Cornyn from Texas, and and they're also talking to Senator Tillis from North Carolina. And so this more than ever, like I said, is the time to do it. So and the reason why we have to do it now is that you saw the timeline that Jess put out there, right? Even if we litigate this for another year or so, the courts are going to kill DACA, right? If you know anything about Judge Hanson, if you're going off what happened in the Fifth Circuit recently, it's gonna die in the courts, right? And even if we do appeal it to the Supreme Court, and we go into 2024, I think the makeup of this court, most people would agree that DACA won't survive. It survives on the procedure, but the actual substance of DACA, I don't think this court would be amenable to keeping it open. So I think what we need, just beyond just like my own advocacy and like other advocates and other organizations, we actually need people like you, people who are in the audience, to call your senator, right? Call the senators from Florida, my senators Rubio and Rick Scott. Call the senators from Texas, North Carolina, South Carolina, really from all over, right? Like call your senator and ask them to pass this legislation, because really, like Jesus alluded to earlier, you're ripping away community members, teachers, home healthcare workers, the whole lot, right? And so, to have that fabric of your community just pulled away all of a sudden would be unfair, right? And then if DACA ends tomorrow or whenever it ends a year from now, we're talking about 5,000 people per week losing their eligibility, losing their work protections, losing their deportation protections. So it's really a must-pass situation. So, and yes, I'll admit that this this will require some compromise. There will, if we do get something passed in this lame duck session, there may be some stuff related to the border. I'm not saying we're going to give away the House, because we're certainly not. We're going to protect our communities, and we're not going to bend over, just to make a deal for making a deal safe. But there will be a compromise, right? And that's what politics is about. That's what it's supposed to be, right? A little give and take. And so, but the most important thing for us right now is to get this passed. And don't forget that, we're not done, right? Like if we pass the DREAM Act tomorrow or in a couple of weeks, right? Like we still have comprehensive immigration reform that we're shooting for. Like we still want to, we still have communities, who receive TPS that we're trying to protect. So it's more, it's more so looking at the opportunity to do what we can for this particular population right now. And then, after that, we're going to certainly keep the fight going. But, this is an opportunity for all legislators that, they say they want to do the right things. Well, here's your opportunity, and so we know that this is a policy that people support, whether it's Democrat or Republican, they support it. At least I think the number for Republican voters was 67%, and then for Democratic voters, I think it was something like 80% who support passing permanent protection. So the rule, like I alluded to, is very similar to what Obama did, but it does what it has to do to keep people employed, keep people protected from deportation. And so we have to do it now, because the courts are coming, the courts have already come, and if we don't do it now, it's just going to get that much more difficult in the future. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Ted. I really appreciate hearing that, especially as a practitioner. I don't often get to think about proposals going through in Congress and what's happening in DC. So I really appreciate that update. We've got some great questions in the chat. Just as a reminder, you can put your questions in the Q&A. Many of the questions have been answered in writing. You can review the answered questions by opening up the Q&A and clicking on the answered tab and review those questions there. I encourage you to continue putting questions in the chat. And for now, I'm going to ask the panelists to again turn on their video. And my question for the panelists, and I think anyone who wants to can chip in, is has the Biden administration done enough with respect to DACA? And what else can or should the Biden administration do? Go ahead, Ted.
So administratively, I think the Biden administration has done as much as it possibly can, right? You know, they issued their new rule, and they've done what they could possibly do. Like, I don't think there's more that they can do from an administrative standpoint, right? But from a legislative and a political standpoint, what they can really do is really push this, right? Like, they can really light a fire, a sense of urgency under Congress to get this done now. They can inject themselves into negotiations and make this a priority for their administration. So I think that you can only do so much before the courts, do what they did in the Fifth Circuit before Judge Hanson comes in and says, no, this is illegal. He was hostile to DACA, which is, protections for parents of DACA recipients, and he's being hostile right now. So I give the Biden administration credit for trying, but I think we all know, like Jess alluded to, what's going to happen down the road. So administratively, they've done what they possibly do, but I think politically and legislatively, certainly they can do more.
I definitely agree with Ted, and I mean, he's right on point. I think at this point, really, the best alternative that we have is from a legislative standpoint. I mean, they need to compromise. And when I say they, I say the administration and the Republican Party. I know sometimes they seem to be on opposite ends, but if there's one thing that I believe both parties agree on, when it comes to immigration, there's very few things that don't agree with immigration, is DACA. And I believe in the past, we've had support of, members of Congress, Republican members of Congress. And I believe that, especially now after the midterms elections, they should sort of, talk again, go back to the discussion table and see what they can agree on. But I think both parties should compromise a little for the benefit of this program.
If I could weigh on this question too, I mean, I agree with what Ted said and what Jesus said. I think it was disappointing to see that the administration didn't go further with the rule. There was a lot of room for improvements and sort of updating the eligibility for qualifying for DACA, because as we know, so many people have been left out based on the really out-of-date requirements to qualify. So that was disappointing. And I think another thing that, especially in the Bataya Vidal litigation that we have focused on, is the people who are stuck in between the two orders. For example, renewals who have had DACA before, but it lapsed for over a year and they're just stuck there. So we have been asking the administration, why can't you change your policy? You're choosing to treat these folks like they're first-time applicants, but they're not. And so that's one fix we've asked for, not successfully up to this point, but we've also asked for folks who are stuck in between to have their applications be processed, at least get their biometrics taken, do whatever they can up to the point of granting or denying, so that if DACA is opened, even for a tiny bit in the future, some of those folks could get approved. Because with the last small window, we saw that happen. Some people made it through, but others got stuck by the time the Hanson order came down. So there are little things here and there that we've been pushing for that the administration could do, but I totally agree with Ted that right now we really need to be focused on Congress because the writing's on the wall.
Thanks, folks. I'm going to move on to another question, which is, what advice would you like to give to current DACA recipients?
So basically, my biggest advice is to seek a reputable immigration attorney to do a full-blown consultation. That's what I would highly recommend because, like everybody mentioned, it's on shaky grounds. Ideally, DACA is like a subset of the Dreamers Act, so to speak. So we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So what I would recommend for recipients, DACA recipients, or even new people who are eligible for DACA, but for the pending litigation, is to seek a reputable immigration attorney to see if there's any other way to normalize your immigration status. Because at this particular point in time, there's nothing secure with DACA. And just like Jesus mentioned in his story, DACA helped them to be able to function, to be in the United States to function, but ultimately he was able to normalize his status in another way. And there's so many DACA recipients that I know that are eligible for other relief and probably have not explored it. I've seen personally when TPS for Venezuela happened, a lot of DACA recipients refuse to apply for TPS because they have been 5-6 years having DACA and not understanding that TPS is codified, is in the INA, it's more secure as opposed to DACA, and they refuse to apply for a TPS, and they remain under DACA status. And unfortunately, right after the registration period for Venezuelan happened, you know, the information about DACA came in, and you're seeing what's going on right now. So I would highly recommend to speak to an immigration attorney to see if at least a way to normalize your status, or probably you have some sort of temporary status that you're eligible for, but you have never explored because at some point you feel comfortable with DACA. That's what I would recommend.
Would anyone else like to chip in?
Well, I guess not from and that was a great advice. You know, couldn't be said any better. Just to seek, you know, some representation, to seek an immigration attorney's advice, as Cassandra mentioned. But really, one thing that I, you know, that I want to suggest is just don't give up. I mean, you're already here. If you know, you already went through, you know, the ordeal, perhaps for a lot of DACA recipients to come to the U.S. Perhaps you didn't know you were coming to this country, or perhaps you came when you were little. Just know that you're already here, that as Cassandra mentioned, perhaps there are other resources available to you, but more than anything, you know, just having that that motivation to just move forward. You know, in my case, for instance, I know I shared my story. You know, it wasn't, and you know, in 10 minutes it's hard to give all the details, but it wasn't like I was in a detention center and then I got DACA and all of a sudden I became a US citizen. It took many years, more than 15 years. And there was a huge chunk of time that I had nothing. There was no work permit, there was no driver's license. It was just me driving, hoping that God will make me invisible as cops will drive by. It was a scary situation, but I think one thing that kept me going was having the right mentality, just trying to do things well. If you go to school, you know, just try to finish school, just try to do your best, just try to be a good person. At the end of the day, whenever you apply for either TPS, or if God, hopefully they help us, they allow the DACA program to remain in place, you know, one of the things that they look at is good moral character. So are you a good person? You know, are you someone who's staying out of trouble? Are you contributing to your community? So just be the best person that you could be. That I think at the end of the day, that's going to help you a whole lot.
Thanks, Jesus. All right. So we've got really great questions in the chat. We may not be able to get to all of them, but Ted, because there's so many questions about sort of legislation, our policy proposals, can you summarize your answers to some of these questions and maybe just give another overview of what you see happening in DC? There are lots of DC related questions in the chat or in the Q&A.
Sure. I saw that one particular question was, what's there to compromise on between Dems and Republicans regarding the DREAM Act? Are there any other proposed immigration laws? Democrats currently control Congress and POTUS, so they can make law. What am I missing? So that's actually a great question. Sometimes I ask myself that question. But seriously, so the bill, HR 6, the DREAM Act, passed in the House, right? And so we were secure there. We had the votes, and it moved over to the Senate, but it stalled in the Senate because in order to pass immigration law, you need 60 votes. Early in the year, I don't know if you guys recall the Build Back Better legislation that they were trying to move that was sort of all-encompassing. Well, we tried to attach comprehensive immigration reform to that bill. We went to the Senate parliamentarian 3 times. Each time we took away a little bit more. And she finally came to the conclusion that immigration law doesn't satisfy the Byrd rule, which would allow you to pass legislation under a 51 vote count, as opposed to overcoming a filibuster. So even though Democrats control the House and the Senate for now, in order to pass a bill, you need the 60 votes, and we need 10 Republican, 10 GOP votes, right? And so the hope is that we can get a compromise of some sort. Like I mentioned earlier in my remarks, we don't want to give up, anything, that would hurt, that would harm our communities, but we certainly understand that if we want to get 10 Republican votes, we're gonna have to give up a little bit something. So, what those details are, I don't have the answer. They don't pay me enough to do that. That's up to the Senate. But we would encourage them, to pass permanent protections. If they want to, have a little bit more border security, what that looks like, we'll take it into consideration. But again, we're not giving up the House. So, to wrap my statement up, in order to get, where we want to get to, we're going to need those 10 votes. The bill that's moving now, that needs to be passed at the end of the year spending bill, otherwise the government will shut down. And so if they can come together and find some type of, work out a deal with Senator Bedelia, Schumer, Durbin, Cornyn, Tillis, and bring on additional 10 GOP voters, we can get this done, So I don't know if that answers the crux of everyone's questions, but I'm happy to answer any other questions that may be out there about the process. So.
Thanks so much, Ted. Yeah, you can, so attendees, feel free to put follow-up questions in the Q&A, and if Ted can get to them in writing, they definitely will. And now I'm going to pass the mic to Jess to answer a question, sort of a series of questions that were in the Q&A, which is, can you clarify which aspects of the rule went into effect and what didn't? And Jess, maybe when you're done answering that question, if you don't mind putting the published rule, which is many hundreds of pages, if you want to read it, you can, but Jess can put that as a response to that question as well. Thank you, Jess.
Of course, and they're great questions. I think Yasmin has asked a couple thorny ones where there are aspects of the rule that are different from how 2012 DACA operated as far as notice of intent to terminate, and making sure that DACA recipients do receive a notice and time to respond. And then also another thing that changed was or that is supposed to change, is instead of focusing on significant misdemeanor, there's this language that expunged convictions, juvenile delinquency adjudications, and convictions under state laws for immigration-related offenses are no longer considered disqualifying convictions for applying for DACA. All that is supposedly great, but it appears, and this is still we're still sort of seeing this shake out, right? Because this has only been 2 weeks since the rule has been partially implemented. I don't think that USCIS is implementing those aspects of the rule. From my reading of the FAQs that they've published online, as well as their response to the Texas order on October 14th, it appears that the only aspect of the rule they are implementing is allowing people who have renewals to continue renewing, and for folks to continue to be able to apply for advanced parole. And so essentially the status quo really hasn't changed. But I would say if you are seeing, if you're getting a notice of intent to terminate or seeing other aspects of the rule that are being implemented, please do reach out, because we'd be very interested in seeing what USCIS is actually doing. But unfortunately, as of right now, my sense is that they are only continuing to adjudicate renewals and requests for advanced parole.
Yeah,
and I will share the rule as well as the FAQ I was referring to.
Thanks so much, Jess. And I'll just add that our organization, because it operates across the state of California, does many DACA renewals, and we do have pending initial applications that we submitted in the winter of 2020 during the period of time when folks could submit initial applications, and we haven't seen any movement, RFEs, NOIDs, anything like that on those applications. We have about 2 minutes if any of the other panelists would like to answer a question live or share any additional information or thoughts. I'm going to take a minute to just look at the Q&A and make sure that I don't want to suggest any other questions, but feel free to keep the questions coming.
I can jump in quickly on Sophie's question. I mean, the general answer is that's a really tough situation. It depends on sort of your judgment individually with that client. If you are moving to admin close a removal case, again, it also depends on what immigration court you're in, what IJ you're working with, and who the TA is as far as how willing they are to do something as in terms of prosecutorial discretion at this point. But if the person has already applied for DACA for the first time DACA, even if, you know, as we know, that's not going to be processed and you have a receipt notice from that, that could be something to submit. Again, whether or not to apply for initial DACA is really an individual choice between the client and the immigration lawyer.
And I'll follow up with that. Sorry, Cassandra, can I follow up on Jess's point really quickly? So in the chat, I don't have a way to message everybody, but in the chat, in response to some of the questions about how to find immigration attorneys, or more specific questions about individual experiences, I submitted some links for ways in which folks can search for free immigration legal services across the country. So if you yourself would like those links and you can't see them in the answered questions, please feel free to put that in the Q&A and we can share some additional resources. Thanks, Cassandra. Go ahead. Oh, Ted.
Yes, I just had a question. I just wanted to comment on what Jess said. I totally agree with Jess. I just wanted to point out, what would be your goal to administratively close a case if the person doesn't have any other relief? Probably your prosecutorial discretion would be to actually dismiss the case depending on the situation. But if you're admin closing the case personally, if I'm admin closing a case would be for EAD purposes, they have a pending I-589 and the calendar has passed for them to get a work permit. Or probably if this person is a DACA recipient, they may be, depending on their case, they may be eligible for a non-LPR cancellation. That could be another case that you file and you try to admin close the case, because that will help the person to get a work permit. Filing the getting the receipt for the initial DACA, it could help, just like Jess mentioned, but what is the goal of administrating close the case as opposed to dismissal if there's no other possible relief? That could be a way of taking this person out of court, removing the high probability of this person being removed, as opposed because they don't have any relief available yet. So what I would do in that particular case, I would really look into to see if there's other reliefs available, and if there are, probably file it with the court and request administrative closure to get a work permit while probably DACA is being adjudicated to some extent.
Thanks so much, Cassandra. And so unfortunately, we are out of time. I see that there's still some additional questions in the Q&A. Folks will try to get to those in writing if we can. But many thanks to all of our panelists, to Jess, Ted, Jesus, and Cassandra. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and for sharing your wisdom and information. Thank you to the almost 400 of you in the audience for attending. This is fantastic. We hope you take this information and share it with folks.